Let us now consider the date ciphered in the other zodiac from Dendera, the round one, which was discovered in the same Egyptian temple as the long zodiac. Constellation figures from the round zodiac are highlighted red. Their symbols are always the same as we find in the long zodiac. Constellation figures in the round zodiac comprise the zodiacal belt that looks like an oblate circle. On its outer side, secondary horoscopes are arranged in a semicircle and colored blue. Secondary horoscope symbols can also be found within the zodiacal belt. Planetary figures from the primary horoscope of the round zodiac are highlighted in yellow. The primary's horoscope's planets, with the exception of the Sun and the Moon, are drawn as wayfarers carrying planetary rods. All the figures one finds outside the zodiacal belt represented by a red line pertain to secondary horoscopes exclusively. The planets of the primary horoscope are only drawn inside the zodiacal belt in this zodiac. However, we do find secondary horoscope planets here as well. There are two borderline cases when it isn't clear a priori whether the planetary symbol in question comes from the primary horoscope or a secondary one. Those are as follows. The wayfarer with the head of a falcon standing on top of the figure of Capricorn. The wayfarer with a human head standing on top of Virgo's ear of wheat. Both of these wayfarers are standing on top of objects that neither resemble snakes nor boats. The implication could be that they serve as planetary symbols in both primary and secondary horoscopes. Boats and snakes were used as special transposition symbols in Egyptian zodiacs. In rectangular Egyptian zodiacs, various other symbols were used for this purpose. However, the transposition rule may not work with round zodiacs whenever the object underneath a figure is neither a boat nor a snake. The problem is that in round zodiacs, the objects aren't arranged in a row the way they are in rectangular zodiacs, but rather hang one over the other. High density of symbols may result in some figures touching others. Therefore, if a planetary figure from a round zodiac has got some symbol underneath, and it cannot be identified as a special transposition symbol, we have to consider different interpretation options for it. It turned out that one of the two above-mentioned ambiguous figures from the round zodiac of Dendera, namely, the one standing on top of Capricorn, comes from the primary horoscope, whereas the one standing on Virgo's ear of wheat is a secondary horoscope figure. However, during the stage of preliminary analysis, the authors allowed all possible identification options for these two figures, which is why both of them are highlighted with two colors at once, yellow and blue. Let us now provide a list of all the planets from the primary horoscope. Saturn is drawn as a male wayfarer with a planetary rod in between Virgo and Libra. The figure has a crescent or a pair of crescent-shaped horns on its head. The best point for Saturn will therefore be the middle of Virgo. Jupiter in the primary horoscope is the male wayfarer with a planetary rod between Cancer and Gemini. According to Morozov, who considered Jupiter to have been in Cancer, we shall choose the middle of Cancer as the best point for Jupiter. Mars is the male wayfarer over Capricorn with a planetary rod in his hand. The fact that the figure stands for Mars is implied by the inscription over its head, as well as the comparison with the long zodiac. Of course, the figure of Mars can also be ascribed to a secondary horoscope, since it hangs right over Capricorn, with its feet almost touching the constellation figure. There is really no choice in this case. We are forced to consider this figure of Mars to be part of the primary horoscope. In the zodiacs of the round type, an object placed underneath a figure isn't necessarily a transposition symbol, unless it's a boat or a snake. And so, Mars is in Capricorn on the primary horoscope of the round zodiac. Venus in the primary horoscope is represented by a pair of female wayfarers carrying planetary rods. The figure in front has a leonine head. We find Venus right underneath the constellation figure of Aries. However, the thread that binds the two Piscean figures leads to Venus as well. Thus, Venus is either shown in Aries or Pisces. Visibility indicators are very important in case of Mercury and Venus. We see no star over the heads of the female pair that represents Venus, which means it was therefore invisible. We consider the middle of Aries to represent the best point for Venus. Mercury in the primary horoscope is drawn as a two-faced man carrying a planetary rod located in between Pisces and Aquarius. We see a star over the head of the figure, which testifies to the visibility of the planet. The best point for Mercury is therefore the cusp of the two constellations. We have thus identified every planet of the round zodiac, the two exceptions being the Sun and the Moon. One of the borderline figures, which can belong to either the primary or a secondary horoscope, remained unused, namely, the wayfarer with a rod observed over Virgo's ear of wheat. This figure should therefore be a fragment of the secondary autumn equinox horoscope, since this is where we find it. There are no other figures with planetary rods anywhere else in the zodiac, excepting the ones in boats, which belong to secondary horoscopes by definition. The Sun and the Moon. We see three circles at once. Each one of them may serve as a solar or lunar symbol. This presents us with some ambiguity. Two of the circles are found in Pisces, and one more in Libra. Fomenko and Nosovsky have therefore considered all possible identification options for the solar and lunar circles. The third one is left unidentified to be subsequently ascribed to one of the secondary horoscopes. The final version, which is the one that yielded an exhaustive solution, proved to be in perfect concurrence with the solar and lunar symbols that we already identified as such in the long zodiac. The Sun from the primary horoscope turned out to be the circle between Aries and Pisces. We see an eye inside the circle. Here, it likely refers to the Sun being close to Alpha Arietis, the star known as the Eye of the Ram. Having defined the planets of the primary horoscope, the authors calculated all possible dates for which the disposition of planets on the celestial sphere would coincide with the way their symbols are arranged in the round zodiac, in case of a single identification option, at least. The rigid criterion applied is the exact correlation between the planetary order in the solution and the zodiac. Several dozen preliminary dates were identified, scattered across the solution search interval between 500 BC and 1900 AD. These dates were subsequently tested for compliance with the secondary horoscopes and planetary visibility indicators. The horoscope of the autumn equinox can be found in the vicinity of Virgo. It includes the following symbols. Male wayfarer with a planetary rod hanging over Virgo's ear of wheat. The bird that sits on the tail of the snake serving the figure of Leo as a stand. The bird ended up right under the feet of the auxiliary Virgo standing on Leo's tail. It can therefore relate to Leo as well as Virgo. 5 figures found under the constellations of Libra, Virgo and Leo in the secondary horoscope row. This row of figures encloses the zodiacal belt in a semicircle. They form the autumn equinox procession. The procession is headed by a man sitting on a stool with his arms reaching forward symmetrically. He is holding 2 identical vessels, one in each hand. These likely symbolize daytime and nighttime, indicating that day equals night at the equinox. The figures seen in front of the equinox symbol belong to another procession, the summer solstice one. Next, we see the symbol of the new year. It looks like a woman sitting on a chair and holding an infant on her palm. This symbol corresponds to the autumn equinox day perfectly, which used to fall over the very beginning of the year in Egyptian calendar, a September year. Next, we see the figure of Saturn carrying a scythe from the secondary horoscope of the autumn equinox. Since Saturn cannot travel too far over the course of a single year, we see the same planet from the primary horoscope right above the one considered here. It looks exactly the same, though equipped with a planetary rod. Next comes Leo, whose paws rest on the autumn equinox plaque. The other plaque looks exactly the same. We find it in Pisces, or the vernal equinox point. However, Leo is hardly drawn here for the mere purpose of resting its paws on the equinox plaque. It is followed by a female figure next to Leo's tail. She has lion-like legs and a tail, and wears a tall hat. She holds a cup on her palm. Such cups are plentiful in the lesser zodiac of Esna, where they accompany secondary horoscope planets. What we see here must therefore be one of the planets from the secondary horoscope. A woman with a leonine body can only represent Venus. The symbolic meaning of this couple is perfectly clear. Venus was in Leo on the day of the autumn equinox. Thus, in the secondary horoscope of the autumn equinox we see Saturn in the same position as it occupies in the primary one, either Virgo or Libra, as well as Venus in Leo. Let's see whether the secondary horoscope figures mentioned earlier might tell us anything. The male figure that stands over Virgo's ear of wheat and the bird underneath the feet of the auxiliary Virgo. The ear of wheat in Virgo's hands represents the Alpha of Virgo, one of the most famous stars in ancient astronomy. Other names of this star are Spica and Virgo's ear of wheat. Therefore, the fact that our planet is standing on top of the ear of wheat implies that it had been very close to Spica on the day of the autumn equinox. The planet is Mercury. There is a hieroglyphic inscription over its head as well as the star that indicates its visibility. The inscription over the head of the planet consists of 3 hieroglyphs. The curved line hieroglyph that stands for the sound S. The human leg hieroglyph that stands for the sound B. The small-handled dipper hieroglyph that stands for the sound K. The name of the planet is therefore SBK. Seeing as how vowels are omitted from Egyptian transcriptions of names as a rule, this name can be read as Sebek. Egyptologists have the tradition of replacing the omitted vowels with the letter E. According Brugsch, Sebek is the name of Mercury. The figure of Mercury is misrepresented in the description of Egypt. Firstly, it is shifted sideways from Virgo's ear of wheat. Secondly, we see a single curved snake instead of the 2 first hieroglyphs in this inscription. One sees the following in the secondary horoscope of autumn equinox from the round zodiac. Saturn is in Virgo or Libra. Mercury is right over Virgo's ear of wheat, or very close to the Alpha of Virgo. Venus is in Leo. Another planet, or, possibly, the Sun, is drawn in either Virgo or Leo as a bird underneath the feet of the auxiliary Virgo. There's another tiny figure of a secondary horoscope planet in this part of the round zodiac. It is sitting on a stool over Leo and holding a whip in its hands. However, this planet is just as likely to come from the secondary horoscope of summer solstice, since it is located right in between the 2 areas covered by these horoscopes. Indeed, in the exhaustive solution, it turned out to be a planet from the horoscope of summer solstice. The secondary horoscope of the winter solstice on the round zodiac was discussed in part 11 of this series. Apart from the standard symbols of the minimal secondary horoscope integrated into the figure of Sagittarius, we see 3 planets here. However, one of them might be the Sun, which should be here on the day of winter solstice at any rate. Moreover, one of them identified as Mars and another likely to stand for Venus. The secondary horoscope of spring equinox depends on the chosen interpretation, since it has to employ the circles in Pisces that aren't part of the primary horoscope. Let us describe the horoscope in the interpretation that eventually led the authors to the final solution. That is, the large circle in Pisces with a female figure inside it pertains to the secondary horoscope of spring equinox. In this case, it should naturally stand for the Sun. The conspicuously large size of this circle corresponds to the idea of the spring equinox as a vernal feast of the Sun. However, in the present case the secondary horoscope of spring equinox is just the same as it is in the long zodiac. The only difference is the fact that the planet making a sacrifice for the feast of the Sun is male in the long zodiac and female here. Therefore, the closest planet to the Sun had been Venus in the prime of its morning visibility. Summer solstice horoscope consists of several figures found inside the zodiacal belt, as well as the summer solstice precession in the secondary horoscope row. There are 4 figures in the precession. One of them has a small bird underneath its feet. There are 2 figures from within the zodiacal belt. The first one is a small male figure in Gemini, near the figure's face, with its feet located at the waist level of Gemini. The figure is holding 2 short sticks, one of them T-shaped. It is wearing a peculiar headdress which looks like 2 broad feathers facing upwards. One of the second Mercury's figures from the long zodiac has a similar headdress, which means that it is likely to represent Mercury here as well. The second figure was already mentioned earlier, a small figure sitting on a stool right over Leo with a tall hat on its head. The gender of the figure is hard to fathom, for the figure is sitting with its legs held together. We see 2 planets in the horoscope so far. The first one is male, located in either Gemini or Taurus. It is likely to be Mercury. The second is either male or female, and we find it in Leo. Let us now consider the precession in the secondary horoscope row. Right underneath Gemini, near the middle of the precession, we find the pole with a solar bird on top of it. This is the symbol of summer solstice. It represents the Sun at its absolute peak, which can only happen on the day of summer solstice. We see another summer solstice symbol nearby, on the left of the pole with the bird, a calf in a boat. We also see several figures meant to represent the planets of this secondary horoscope here, one on either side of each of the 2 summer solstice signs. On the right of the pole with a bird, possibly a reference to morning visibility from the side of Taurus, we see a male planet. It is a large figure of a walking man taking large steps, with a whip on his shoulder and a planetary rod in his hand. There is a bird at his feet. It bears distant semblance to a hen or a goose, possibly a peacock. A whip on the shoulder may be an attribute of either Mars or Jupiter, whereas the goose is a symbol of Mars. The disposition of the planet suggests that it is most likely Mars, although we can make no certain claims so far. The exact position of this planet on the ecliptic remains unclear. On the far left of the summer solstice precession we see a woman with a strung bow in her hands. She is preparing to fire an arrow over the head of the horizontal figure of Taurus. Next, we see the figures from the secondary horoscope of autumn equinox as mentioned earlier. The woman firing an arrow over the head of the incumbent Taurus is a symbol which we shall frequently encounter in Egyptian zodiacs. It stands for Venus in secondary horoscopes. We find Venus on the other side of the solar symbol than the one where we see the first planetary figure, probably Mars, so it is likely to have been drawn in opposite visibility position as well, apparently evening. We cannot determine the constellation that housed Venus. The interpretation of this secondary horoscope is as follows. We see some planet in either Gemini, next to the Sun, or in Taurus, possibly Mercury. Another planet, whose shape tells us nothing, was in Leo. Some male planet was observable perfectly well in morning visibility, Mars most probably. Venus was in evening visibility. Fomenko and Nosovsky only came up with the complete solution for a single interpretation option of the round zodiac's primary horoscope. The solution is unique: the morning of March 20, 1185 AD. The fact that the observations were conducted in the morning plays a key role. Planetary visibility conditions aren't met for evening observations. A natural question arises. What historical event does this date correspond to? Studies by Anatoly Fomenko and Gleb Nosovsky have shown that this zodiac records a date directly related to Christ, namely, the first day of the seven-day Jewish Passover, during which Christ was crucified on Friday, March 22, 1185 AD. Thus, the round zodiac of Dendera, or the zodiac of Osiris, the most famous of the ancient Egyptian zodiacs, is a zodiac of Christ. Moreover, Osiris is simply the ancient Egyptian name for Christ. In addition, the astronomical dating of the long zodiac of Dendera yielded the date April 22 to 26, 1168 AD, which is only 17 years earlier than the date recorded on the round zodiac. Given the proximity of the two dates, the long zodiac of Dendera was likely also dedicated to an event from the earthly life of Christ.